It was during dinner that the illusion of my marriage shattered. Sarah, my wife of 6 years, sat across from me, laughing at one of her own jokes. The glow of candlelight danced across her face, and for a moment, I envied her calmness. Because in that same moment, her phone buzzed, and everything changed. The sound itself wasn't unusual, her phone had been buzzing more often lately. I'd noticed but hadn't said anything, chalking it up to her work. She was always so busy these days, or so she claimed. But tonight, I happened to glance down as her phone lit up on the table. A message preview popped up. Simple, direct, and enough to knock the air from my lungs. I can't stop thinking about last night. For a moment, I convinced myself I'd misread it. It couldn't mean what I thought it meant. Right? But Sarah, noticing the shift in my expression, quickly grabbed her phone and turned it face down. "Who's that?" I asked casually, though my heart was pounding like a drum. "Oh, just Jessica," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, avoiding eye contact. "She's going through some stuff and needs advice." That's when I knew something was wrong. Not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Her voice was too light, too rehearsed, and her hand trembled ever so slightly as she reached for her wine glass. I didn't press further, yet. I needed to stay calm, to think clearly, to figure out how to get the truth. I watched her closely for the rest of the meal, every movement, every forced laugh. And with each passing second, my suspicions grew. It wasn't until later that night, when she went to take a shower, that I made my move. Her phone was still on the table, the screen dark but filled with secrets. I hesitated, my conscience battling with my curiosity. But something deep inside me, a need for answers, for the truth, pushed me forward. With trembling hands, I unlocked her phone. What I found would change everything. The phone felt heavier in my hand than it had any right to be, like it was loaded with the weight of every lie she'd told me over the past few months. My heart raced as the screen lit up, illuminating a flurry of notifications and messages. At first, I didn't know where to start. But then, almost as if mocking me, the name Logan stared back from the top of her message list. Logan? The name barely registered, but it wasn't unfamiliar. Sarah had mentioned a Logan once or twice, always in passing. Just a guy from the office, she'd said. Nothing important. Nothing important, huh? My gut told me otherwise. I opened the message thread, and my worst fears were confirmed. Logan wasn't just a guy. He was the guy. The first message I saw was from earlier that afternoon. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Your body. I can't get enough of you." My stomach churned. I scrolled further, and it only got worse. Their conversations weren't just about stolen moments in the dark, they were full of inside jokes, intimate confessions, and worst of all, plans for a future. A future without me. "We should run away together," one message read. "Maybe one day," Sarah had replied, followed by a winking emoji. My hand started to shake, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I felt a storm brewing inside me, rage, betrayal, heartbreak, all fighting for dominance. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Years? Every moment I thought I knew my wife, every memory we'd built together, now felt like a lie. And then I saw it, a photo. I hesitated, but curiosity and anger got the better of me. I tapped on it, and there it was, Sarah, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years, lying in what I could only assume was Logan's bed. The sheets were a different color, the room unfamiliar, but her face told me everything. She was happy. Happier than I'd ever seen her. The sound of the shower turning off snapped me out of my daze. I locked the phone and placed it back on the table just as Sarah stepped into the room, a towel wrapped around her body and a casual smile on her face. "What's that look for?" she asked, her tone light and teasing, as if nothing was wrong. As if she hadn't been betraying me behind my back. I forced a smile. Nothing. Just thinking about work. It took every ounce of self-control I had to keep my voice steady. Confronting her now, in the heat of the moment, would give her the upper hand. She'd cry, deny, twist the story to make me question what I'd seen. No, I needed time. Time to figure out my next move. Time to gather proof that she couldn't talk her way out of. "Oh, don't think about work now," she said, coming over to kiss me on the cheek. Her lips felt like poison. "Let's watch something together." I nodded, playing the part of the clueless husband, but my mind was racing. The messages, the photo, her lies, they were all circling my thoughts like vultures, tearing apart what little trust one had left. We sat on the couch, the TV playing some mindless show I couldn't focus on. Sarah snuggled up next to me, her head resting on my shoulder. The weight of her felt suffocating. How could she act so normal, so loving, when she'd just been texting another man about their last rendezvous? Did she think I was stupid? Or was she so confident in her lies that she believed I'd never find out? As the minutes passed, I felt the anger inside me grow. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the disrespect, the way she'd made a fool of me. And as I sat there, staring blankly at the screen, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into thinking this was somehow my fault. She had made her choices, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. That night, as Sarah slept peacefully beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief. I kept replaying our life together, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong. Was it something I'd done? Had I missed the signs? Or had Sarah simply grown tired of me, looking for excitement in the arms of someone else? At some point, I realized there was no point in torturing myself with questions I couldn't answer. What mattered now was the truth, and what I was going to do about it. The next morning, Sarah acted as if nothing had happened, as if our life was picture perfect. She kissed me goodbye before heading off to work, leaving me alone in the house. But I knew better now. I knew she wasn't going to the office. She was going to him. I decided to follow her. I sat at the dining table for what felt like hours after Sarah left, her perfume lingering in the air. My mind was a battlefield, emotions clashing with each other, anger fighting sadness, betrayal battling disbelief. But amidst the chaos, one thing became clear: I wasn't going to sit idly by while she continued to lie to my face. I needed to know the full truth, no matter how much it hurt. Sarah had left the house at 8:15 sharp, wearing the same confident smile she always did when she told me she was heading to work. But this time, I didn't just let her walk out. This time, I followed her. I waited a few minutes to avoid suspicion, then grabbed my keys and slipped out the door. My car was parked a block away, a precaution I hoped would keep me from being noticed. As I pulled out onto the street, my heart pounded in my chest. What if she caught me? What if I was wrong? But deep down, I already knew I wasn't. The messages, the photo, there was no denying the truth. Sarah's car was easy to spot, her bright red sedan standing out against the morning traffic. I stayed a few cars behind, my hands gripping the wheels so tightly my knuckles turned white. She drove past her usual route to the office, taking an unfamiliar turn that made my stomach twist. I knew then that she wasn't going to work. She drove for about 20 minutes, heading out of town toward a quieter, more suburban area. My mind raced as I tried to piece it all together. Was she meeting him? Was this where Logan lived? Every worst-case scenario flashed through my mind, each one more painful than the last. Finally, she turned into the driveway of a modest, single-story house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. I slowed down, parking a few houses away where I could still see her but wouldn't be seen myself. Sarah stepped out of the car, looking around as if to make sure no one was watching, then walked up to the front door. She didn't even knock. She just opened the door and walked in. That was it. My heart sank like a stone. There was no more doubt, no more room for excuses. She was here to see him. My wife, my Sarah, was walking into another man's home like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she belonged there. For a moment, I thought about storming up to the door, demanding answers right then and there. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of what I'd find inside. Maybe it was the realization that I needed to be smart about this. Confronting her without proof wouldn't give me the closure I needed. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to catch her in the act. I waited in the car for what felt like an eternity, every minute stretching out like an hour. My mind was a whirlwind of anger and heartbreak, but I forced myself to stay calm. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of the car and approached the house, staying close to the bushes for cover. The living room blinds were partially open, giving me a clear view inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. Sarah was sitting on the couch, laughing with Logan like they'd been together forever. He was everything I wasn't, taller, broader, with a confident grin that made me sick to my stomach. They were sitting far too close for comfort, their legs brushing against each other. Logan leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and she giggled like a teenager. Then, without hesitation, she reached over and touched his face, her fingers tracing his jawline. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't some meaningless distraction. This was intimacy. This was affection. This was my wife, giving another man what she used to give me. I clenched my fists, my body trembling with rage. I wanted to burst through the door and tear Logan apart, to scream at Sarah and make her see the damage she'd done. But instead, I pulled out my phone and took a picture. I needed proof, something she couldn't deny or twist. As much as I hated the idea of stooping to that level, I knew it was the only way to protect myself when the time came to confront her. I stayed there for another 10 minutes, watching them laugh, talk, and share moments that should have been mine. When Logan leaned in and kissed her, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and walked back to my car, my vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just seen. The drive home was a blur. My hands shook, my heart ached, and my mind replayed the scene over and over again. I'd never felt so betrayed, so humiliated. But amidst the pain, a new resolve began to form. This wasn't just about catching Sarah in her lies anymore. This was about taking back control of my life, about deciding what came next. When I got home, I started making plans. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. She had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. That night, Sarah came home like nothing had happened. Her smile was wide, her energy cheerful, as if she'd spent the day at the office instead of wrapped up in another man's arms. It was sickening. She breezed into the kitchen, humming a tune, and dropped her purse onto the counter. "Hey, babe," she chirped, her voice as light as air. "What do you want for dinner?" I was thinking maybe tacos. I didn't answer immediately. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at her with a calmness that wasn't calm at all. My heart was pounding in my chest, every beat screaming for me to get up and unleash the storm brewing inside me. But I stayed seated, gripping my phone in my pocket like a lifeline. The picture I'd taken earlier was still fresh in my mind, and on my screen. "Mike," she called again, turning to look at me, finally noticing my silence. Her smile faltered slightly. "You okay? You look tense." Tense. That was one way to put it. I'd spent hours preparing for this moment, going over what I'd say, how I'd handle it. I wanted to be measured, in control, but now that she was standing in front of me, the betrayal hit me all over again. "I saw you today," I said, my voice low but steady. Her cheerful demeanor faltered instantly, replaced by a confused expression. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I followed you," I said, standing up slowly, my eyes never leaving hers. "To Logan's house." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Mike, wait." "No," I cut her off, my voice sharper now. "Don't even try to lie to me, Sarah. I saw everything. I saw you laughing with him, touching him, kissing him." I pulled out my phone and held up the picture. "This is what you were doing when you said you were at work." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression frozen somewhere between shock and guilt. Then, as if a switch flipped, her face hardened. "So what if I was?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "You've been distant for months, Mike. You barely even notice me anymore. Can you really blame me for finding someone who actually makes me feel alive?" Her words hit like a slap to the face, but I refused to let her see how much they stung. "Don't you dare put this on me," I said, my voice rising. "I've been here every single day, working my ass off to provide for us, to make this marriage work. And while I was doing that, you were sneaking around behind my back. You don't get to play the victim, Sarah. Not this time." She rolled her eyes, a gesture so casual it made my blood boil. "Oh, please. Don't act like you're some perfect husband. You've been so wrapped up in your job that you didn't even notice I was miserable. Logan did. He actually listens to me. He makes me feel wanted. And that justifies cheating?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decide to throw away our marriage for some fling?" "It's not a fling," she shot back, her tone defensive. "You don't know anything about him or about us." "You're right," I said, stepping closer, my voice calm but full of anger. "I don't know anything about him. But I know this, you lied to me. You betrayed me. And you didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it." She flinched at my words, but her defiance didn't waver. "Maybe I wouldn't have had to lie if you'd actually paid attention to me," she said, her voice rising. "But you didn't, Mike. You haven't in years. Logan, he saw me when you didn't. And what about me?" I yelled, finally losing the composure I'd been holding on to. "Did you ever stop to think about how this would affect me? Or were you too busy thinking about yourself?" The room went silent. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I could see the wheels turning in her head, her mind scrambling for a way to twist this in her favor. But no matter what she said, no matter how hard she tried to justify it, I knew the truth. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. Finally, she sighed and threw up her hands. "You know what? Maybe we're just not meant to be together anymore, Mike. Maybe this is for the best." Her words hit like a final blow, cutting through whatever fragile hope I had left. For 6 years, I'd believed in her, trusted her, loved her. And now, standing in front of me, she was throwing it all away like it meant nothing. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Maybe we're not meant to be together. But I'm not the one who destroyed this marriage, Sarah. You did." Her expression faltered, just for a moment, before she straightened her shoulders and walked past me toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed," she said coldly. "We can talk about this in the morning." I watched her go, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. There was nothing left to say. She'd made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. Sarah went upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the house as if she hadn't just shattered everything we'd built together. I stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the photo on my phone one last time before locking it. I didn't need to see it anymore. The image was burned into my mind, the way she smiled at Logan, the way her hand lingered on his arm. That wasn't an accident. It was the kind of connection you don't fake, and knowing that only deepened the ache in my chest. But the pain wasn't just emotional anymore. It was turning into something else, something darker. Anger. Determination. A need to take control of a situation that had spiraled out of my hands. I needed a plan. Sarah thought she could manipulate the narrative. Her attempt to shift the blame, to spin this into my fault because of her so-called unhappiness, only proved how far she'd gone. But I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed, not emotionally, not legally. If she wanted to act like this marriage meant nothing to her, I'd treat it the same way. Ruthlessly. The first thing I did was grab my laptop and start researching. Divorce attorneys, asset protection, even steps to safeguard myself financially, everything I'd need to prepare for the inevitable. If Sarah wanted freedom, I'd give it to her, but on my terms. The house? The savings? Everything we'd built together? She wasn't going to walk away with a dime more than she deserved. I knew her well enough to know she'd try. Sarah wasn't just manipulative, she was calculating. If she thought she could outsmart me, she'd do it in a heartbeat. But not this time. This time, I'd be ready. After an hour of research, I realized I needed hard proof. Sure, the texts and the photo were damning, but courts wouldn't just rely on that. I needed a professional to back me up. So, I reached out to a private investigator. It felt like a low move, hiring someone to dig into my wife's secrets, but at this point, all bets were off. If she wanted to lie, cheat, and betray me, she'd have to deal with the consequences. The call was short and to the point. The investigator, a man named Thomas, assured me he'd handle everything discreetly. "It's not the first time I've seen this," he said in a tone that was both comforting and unsettling. "We'll get you the evidence you need." After hanging up, I sat there for a while, staring at the darkened screen of my laptop. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. It was the kind of silence that should have been peaceful, but instead, it was suffocating. I kept waiting for the sound of Sarah's footsteps coming back down the stairs, for her to say something, anything, to acknowledge what she'd done. But there was nothing. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed everything. That maybe I'd imagined the texts, the photo, the confrontation. But when I walked into the kitchen and saw Sarah sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone like it was just another normal day, reality hit me all over again. "Morning," she said without looking up, her tone casual. She sipped her coffee, her lips barely curving into a smile. I didn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my own cup and sat down across from her, watching her every move. She was wearing that mask again, the one she always wore when she wanted to seem like everything was fine. But I knew better now. That mask wasn't Sarah. It was a carefully constructed version of her, the one she used to manipulate people. And I wasn't falling for it anymore. "What's the plan today?" she asked, finally glancing up. Her tone was light, almost playful, as if nothing had happened the night before. "I've got a lot to take care of," I said, keeping my voice even. "And so do you." She frowned slightly, tilting her head. "What's that supposed to mean?" I set my coffee down and leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "It means this marriage is over, Sarah. I'm done." Her face paled for a split second, but then she laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, come on, Mike. Don't be dramatic. We had a fight. Couples fight. It doesn't mean we're throwing everything away." "This isn't just a fight," I said, my voice firm. "You cheated on me, Sarah. You lied to me. You disrespected me. And then you had the nerve to blame me for it. This isn't something we come back from." Her expression shifted, the laughter vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. "You're serious," she said, her voice quieter now. "Dead serious." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "So what? You're just going to walk away? After everything we've been through?" "No, Sarah," I said, standing up and placing my mug in the sink. "You walked away the moment you chose him. I'm just following through." For the first time, she didn't have a snarky reply. She just sat there, staring at me as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. And maybe she couldn't. Sarah was used to being in control, to bending people to her will. But not this time. This time, I was the one calling the shots. "I'll be meeting with a lawyer this week," I said, turning to leave the kitchen. "I suggest you do the same." As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt like I was finally taking my life back. Sarah had made her choice, and now I was making mine. But I knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of preparations. Calls to attorneys, meetings with the private investigator, and endless paperwork consumed my time. I hadn't told Sarah yet, but I'd already started the process of filing for divorce. I wasn't just ending our marriage, I was preparing for war. Sarah, on the other hand, acted like nothing had changed. She still went about her daily routine as if she hadn't just torched the foundation of our relationship. If anything, she seemed more relaxed, even cheerful. It was infuriating. How could someone who had done so much damage carry on so effortlessly? On the third day after our confrontation, I got a call from Thomas, the private investigator. His voice was calm but firm, the kind of voice that didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've got what you need," he said. "You were right to be suspicious. She's been seeing him regularly, lunches, private meetups, even staying at his place a couple of nights last month. I've got photos, timestamps, everything." My stomach twisted. Even though I'd known the truth for days now, hearing it confirmed in such concrete terms was like a fresh wound. But I forced myself to push the pain aside. This wasn't about emotions anymore. This was about facts. About winning. "Send me everything," I said, my voice cold. "I'll pass it on to my lawyer." After the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone, the weight of the evidence pressing down on me. I didn't want to look at the photos, didn't want to see her smiling, laughing, and touching him. But I had to. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. The images were clear and damning. Sarah and Logan walking hand in hand, sharing intimate conversations over coffee, and, in one particularly gut-wrenching shot, kissing in his car. There was no mistaking what this was. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown relationship, one she'd been nurturing right under my nose. That night, I decided to confront her again. Not to argue or plead, but to lay everything out in the open. I wanted her to know that I wasn't going to let her get away with this. That I was done being the naive husband she thought she could manipulate. When Sarah came home, I was waiting for her in the living room. She walked in with that same carefree attitude, tossing her purse onto the couch and kicking off her shoes. "Hey," she said casually, glancing at me. "You look serious. What's up?" I didn't waste time. I pulled out the folder of evidence Thomas had sent me and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She frowned, her eyes darting to the folder. "What's that?" "Proof," I said, crossing my arms. "Proof of your affair with Logan. Pictures, dates, everything." For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the folder before pulling it back. "You hired someone to spy on me?" she asked, her voice rising in anger. "That's disgusting, Mike. Do you even hear yourself right now? Disgusting?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You're calling me disgusting? After everything you've done? She opened her mouth to respond but then closed it, clearly realizing she didn't have a leg to stand on. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with some way to spin this in her favor. You know what? She said, standing up and crossing her arms. Yeah, I screwed up. I'll admit it. But don't act like you're some saint, Mike. You've been checked out of this marriage for years. You care more about work than you ever cared about me. And that justifies cheating? I shot back. Sneaking around behind my back. Lying to my face every single day. If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. You could have ended things. But instead, you decided to humiliate me. Her face twisted in anger. Humiliate you? Do you even hear yourself? You're the one making this a spectacle. Spying on me, dragging lawyers into this. You're pathetic. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Her words stung, but I wouldn't let her bait me into losing my composure. This isn't about me, Sarah. This is about your choices. And now, you're going to face the consequences. She rolled her eyes, scoffing. Oh, please. What are you going to do? Take the house? The car? Good luck with that. You don't scare me, Mike. Maybe not, I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. But the court will. And trust me, they're not going to look kindly on a woman who cheats on her husband while trying to milk him for everything he's worth. Her confident facade cracked for just a moment, a flicker of panic flashing across her face. But she quickly recovered, her lips curling into a smirk. Fine, she said, throwing her hands up. Do whatever you want. File for divorce. Take your stupid pictures to a lawyer. I don't care. She turned to walk away, but I wasn't done. One more thing, I said, stopping her in her tracks. Don't think for a second that you're going to get away with this. Not legally, and not morally. I'm done playing nice, Sarah. She didn't respond. She just stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I stood there in the living room, the silence almost deafening. This wasn't the ending I'd envisioned for our marriage, but it was the one she'd chosen. And now, it was time for me to finish what she'd started. The days following our last confrontation were a haze of cold, calculated moves. Sarah stayed out of my way for the most part, though her passive-aggressive jabs filled the air whenever we crossed paths. It didn't matter, her words couldn't cut me anymore. The wound she'd left was already too deep, and my focus was on one thing, closing this chapter of my life on my terms. I met with my lawyer, Karen, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. As I laid out the evidence, the photos, the texts, the timeline, her expression shifted from neutral to something resembling quiet fury. This is airtight, she said, flipping through the folder I handed her. With this kind of proof, there's no way she walks out of this unscathed. Have you discussed finances? The house? Shared assets? I haven't brought it up yet, I admitted. But I know Sarah. She's going to fight tooth and nail to take as much as she can. Karen nodded, her pen tapping against her notepad. That's typical in cases like this. She'll try to frame it as a response to her unhappiness. Probably say something about how you neglected her emotionally or financially. Let her, I said coldly. I don't care what lies she spins. The evidence speaks for itself. Karen smiled faintly, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. Good. Stay calm, stick to the facts, and don't let her bait you into any emotional outbursts. Judges see right through that. This is about control now, Mike. And it sounds like you're finally taking yours back. As I left her office, I felt an odd mix of relief and dread. Relief that I was finally doing something to protect myself, but dread at the reality of what lay ahead. Divorce wasn't just a word, it was a storm, one that would upend my life in ways I couldn't yet fully comprehend. But I was ready. Or at least, I told myself I was. Back at home, the tension was palpable. Sarah's smug attitude had shifted slightly, there was a nervous edge to her now. I hadn't told her about the lawyer yet, but I was sure she suspected something. She was smart, after all, manipulative, calculating. The kind of person who always thought 3 steps ahead. But for once, I was the one ahead of her. The breaking point came 2 nights later. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV to distract myself, when Sarah walked in. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me, before finally speaking. "So, what's the plan here, Mike?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are we just going to live like this forever? Cold, silent, and awkward?" I muted the TV and turned to face her. "The plan is simple," I said evenly. "We get divorced. We split everything fairly. And we move on." She laughed bitterly, crossing her arms. "Fairly? Oh, please. We both know you're going to try to screw me over. That's why you've been sneaking around, talking to your lawyer." I raised an eyebrow. "Screwing you over? You mean like how you screwed me over by cheating and lying for months?" Her expression darkened, but she didn't deny it. "I made a mistake," she said, her tone defensive. "But don't act like you're innocent in all of this. You've been distant for years, Mike. You don't even know what it's like to feel invisible in your own marriage." "Spare me the excuses, Sarah," I said, standing up. "If you were unhappy, you should have told me. Instead, you ran to Logan and turned this into a circus. That's on you." Her jaw tightened, her hands balling into fists. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? So perfect. Well, guess what, Mike? Nobody's perfect. Not me, not you, nobody." "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not perfect. But I didn't betray the person I vowed to spend my life with." That shut her up. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge in the background. Then she spoke, her voice quieter now. "So that's it? We're done?" "Yes," I said firmly. "We're done." The next morning, I served her the divorce papers. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents as if they were a foreign language. Her initial reaction was shock, then anger, and finally, a chilling calm. "You really thought this through, didn't you?" she said, flipping through the pages. "You've been planning this for a while." "I have," I admitted. "Because unlike you, I don't lie to myself about where this is going." She smirked, shaking her head. "Fine. If this is what you want, I won't fight you. But don't think for a second that you're the victim here, Mike. You've got your faults too." I didn't respond. Her words didn't matter anymore. I'd already wasted enough energy trying to make sense of her betrayal, trying to rationalize the irrational. Now, it was about action, not words. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the papers, I felt a strange sense of closure. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't weighed down by anger or heartbreak. Instead, there was a clarity, a sense of purpose. Sarah had made her choices, and now I was making mine. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. It wasn't my home anymore, it hadn't been for a long time. I booked a hotel room for the time being, giving myself space to breathe, to think, to plan my next steps. The house, the marriage, the life I thought I had, all of it was behind me now. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, one where I was finally free from Sarah's lies and manipulation. One where I could rebuild, rediscover who I was, and take back control of my life. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. A week had passed since I left the house. I'd stayed at a quiet hotel on the edge of town, a place far enough removed from the life I was leaving behind. Each day felt like progress, a step further away from the wreckage of my marriage and closer to a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. But even as I moved forward, there was one thing left to do: face Sarah one last time. The divorce papers had been delivered, the legal wheels set in motion. Sarah hadn't reached out since that morning at the kitchen table, and I was grateful for the silence. But now, I needed to return to the house. Not to fight, not to argue, but to take the last of my things and close the door on this chapter for good. When I pulled into the driveway, the sight of the house hit me harder than I expected. This was the place where we'd built our life together, or so I'd thought. It was where we'd celebrated anniversaries, hosted friends, and shared quiet nights on the couch. Now, it was just a structure, stripped of its meaning, a hollow shell of what it used to be. Sarah's car was in the driveway. I'd texted her earlier to let her know I was coming by, and she'd agreed to give me space to pack up without a fight. But as I stepped through the front door, I could feel the tension in the air. She was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in her hand. Her eyes met mine briefly before she looked away. "You're early," she said, her voice flat. "I want to get this over with," I replied, heading straight for the stairs. "Mike," she called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not yet. I spent the next hour in my old bedroom, packing up the last of my belongings. Clothes, books, keepsakes, all of it went into boxes and suitcases with an efficiency that surprised me. I wasn't sentimental anymore. These were just things, and none of them could hold the weight of what I'd lost. As I finished taping up the last box, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She looked different, less defiant, more vulnerable. It was the first time I'd seen her like this in weeks, maybe even months. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the old Sarah, the one I'd fallen in love with. But I knew better than to trust it. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. "Fine." We moved back to the living room, where she sat on the couch and I stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to get comfortable. This wasn't a conversation, it was a conclusion. "I've been thinking," she began, swirling the wine in her glass. "About everything. About us." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. She took a deep breath and looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice trembling. "For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, all of it. I don't know what I was thinking, Mike. I made a mistake." The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Part of me wanted to believe her, to take her apology at face value and let it ease the ache in my chest. But the other part, the smarter, stronger part, knew better. Apologies didn't erase actions, and regret didn't undo the damage she'd caused. "It's too late for that," I said, my tone steady. "You didn't just make a mistake, Sarah. You made a choice. Over and over again. And now, we're both living with the consequences." She winced at my words, but I didn't soften. I couldn't. I'd spent too long being the one who compromised, who bent to make things work, who gave more than I got. "Not anymore. I don't expect you to forgive me," she said after a long pause. "But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even with everything that happened. I never stopped." Her words stung, but they didn't sway me. "Love doesn't look like this," I said, gesturing around the room, at the broken pieces of our marriage. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did. You wouldn't have lied, or cheated, or disrespected everything we built together. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. Not this time. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming the life she'd tried to take from me. "I don't hate you, Sarah," I said after a moment, my voice softening just slightly. "But I can't love you either. Not after this." She nodded, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of my words had finally broken through. "I understand," she whispered. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle between us. Then I turned and walked toward the door, my suitcase in hand. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. Driving away from that house, I didn't look back. There was no point. The life I'd shared with Sarah was over, and what lay ahead was mine to rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, starting over never is, but I knew I'd come out stronger on the other side. Looking back, I realized something important: Sarah's betrayal hadn't just broken me. It had also forced me to confront the parts of myself I'd neglected for years. My goals, my passions, my sense of self. Losing her had given me the opportunity to find myself again. And that's exactly what I planned to do. This was the end of my marriage. But it was also the beginning of my freedom.